Number 3. Republic F84 Thunderjet. The Republic F84 Thunderjet was a turbojet fighter-bomber aircraft that was developed at the end of World War II. It was designed in response to the U.S. Army Air Force's USAAF desire to develop a day fighter. Their proposal called for a jet-powered fighter aircraft with a top speed of 600 miles per hour, a combat radius of 850 miles, and an armament of 6 to 8 machine guns. The Thunderjet's designers initially tried to replace the P-47 Thunderbolt's piston-powered engine with a jet engine, but soon realized that the Thunderbolt's fuselage couldn't easily be redesigned to accommodate the new engines. So they built an entirely new aircraft with a slimmer fuselage and other features that marked the U.S. military's transition into the era of modern aviation. The specifications set forth by Chief Designer Alexander Kartvelli proved to be too ambitious. Consequently, the Thunderjet's range was reduced to 705 miles, and its armament requirement was decreased to 4 to 6 machine guns. The military counted on the aircraft to be a success even before it took to the skies for the first time. Problems began to emerge during wind tunnel testing of the prototype in 1945, which revealed longitudinal instability, meaning that the plane had a tendency to pitch up or down, and it struggled to maintain a consistent altitude. It was also prone to skin buckling on the stabilizer at high speeds. Adding to the growing list of concerns about the Thunderjet was the fact that it seemed to keep getting heavier and heavier, prompting USAAF officials to impose a gross weight limit of 13,400 pounds. Despite any red flags, development continued, and in 1946 the aircraft set a national speed record of 607.2 miles per hour. Prototypes only underwent limited testing before Thunderjets were rolling off the production line. It wasn't long before the lack of thoroughness caught up with the military. The thick wings had weak spars and the plane's wingtip fuel tanks were shaky. Right as the Pentagon was about to cancel the program for the aircraft's failure to fulfill its intended purpose, the Republic debuted an updated version of the Thunderjet. Known as the F84D, it had a more powerful engine, sturdier wing spars, and improved fuel tanks. But the plane was still far from perfect. Due to its weight, it had high takeoff and landing speeds, requiring a longer runway than previous aircraft models of its type. Its wing design also made it slower than competing fighter jets like the Soviet-built MiG-15, which reached speeds of up to 680 miles per hour. The F-84D was replaced by yet another improved version of itself called the F-84E, which was dispatched to serve under the U.S. 5th Air Force in the Korean War in 1950. It quickly became clear that the Thunderjet was inferior to the MiG-15, forcing military commanders to use it for ground attacks rather than air-to-air combat. It nevertheless came to play a major role in the conflict, flying more than 86,000 missions and dropping nearly 55,600 tons of bombs and 6,129 tons of napalm over North Korea. According to the Air Force, the Thunderjet was responsible for taking out an estimated 60% of all ground targets that the Americans destroyed. One of the F-84's biggest contributions to the war came in late June 1952, when 84 Thunderjets laid siege to the Sui-Ho Dam complex, destroying 90% of its hydroelectric generating facilities and leaving North Korea without power for 2 weeks. While the raid failed to achieve its objective of pressuring the North Koreans into peace negotiations, the F-84s accomplished what they set out to do. In addition to its impressive combat performance, the Thunderjet was the first fighter to use aerial refueling, which is when one aircraft delivers fuel to another while flying. The Republic continued to develop the F-84 series throughout the 1950s. The F-84G was the final model in the F-84 series to be designed and built. By the time the later models entered service, technology was advancing rapidly and the Thunderjet and its successors were quickly becoming obsolete. During the late 1950s, the Air Force began to retire all the F-84 models in favor of more advanced supersonic fighter jets. The aircraft continued to serve in the National Guard until 1970 and has served in 14 countries besides the U.S., including Belgium, Denmark, France, Norway, Italy, Turkey, Portugal, and China. The Greek Air Force retired the last F-84 in 1991. If you had the chance to fly in an F-84 Thunderjet, would you do it? Tell us in the comments below and hit subscribe while you're at it. Number 2. FV101 Scorpion. The FV101 Scorpion is a light tank and a tracked armored reconnaissance vehicle that was developed during the early 1960s. It entered into service with the British Army in 1973 and was retired over 20 years later in 1994. During that time, more than 3,000 were produced for the British Army, the Royal Air Force Regiment, and as exports. As a light reconnaissance tank, the Scorpion is part of a family of armored fighting vehicles called the Combat Vehicle Reconnaissance Tracked, or CVRT, which also includes armored personnel carriers, armored ambulances, anti-tank guided missile vehicles, and armored recovery vehicles. Designed to share common parts, all CVRT variants were meant to be small, light, and highly mobile with low ground pressure. Unlike conventional tanks, the Scorpion was designed to be transportable by air, which meant that it couldn't be built with typical armor, which would have been too heavy. Instead of steel, its designers opted for an aluminum alloy armor, which kept its weight to around 8.8 tons. In order to fit inside the transport aircraft of the time, the Scorpion could be no more than 8 feet 2 inches long and no wider than 6 feet 10.8 inches. This left limited room for the engine, which had to fit next to a driver in full winter gear and therefore had a maximum width of 24 inches. Because no tank engines were suitable for the vehicle, its designers used a 6-cylinder Jaguar 4.2-liter gas engine that was modified to use military-grade fuel and then replaced with a diesel engine. The Scorpion prototypes went through extensive hot and cold weather testing in some of the world's most extreme environments, including parts of Norway, Canada, Australia, and Abu Dhabi. It performed well in all settings, especially when it came to speed. The vehicle was capable of accelerating from standing to 30 miles per hour in 16 seconds and had a top speed of around 50 miles per hour. Various sources claim that it achieved the Guinness World Record for the fastest production tank after reaching a speed of 51.1 miles per hour at the Chinty Q vehicle test track in Surrey, England in 2002. While it's unclear whether it still officially holds the record, the FV101 is definitely known to be faster than any other vehicle of its kind. While it had the advantage of speed and versatility, the Scorpion sacrificed when it came to other aspects of the vehicle. There were limits on what its lightweight armor could withstand, but it was capable of resisting a decent amount of gunfire. It was prone to corrosion and stress fractures, however, and all early versions of the Scorpion were heavily affected by the issue. It nevertheless became incredibly popular throughout the world during its operating years. Militaries in more than a dozen countries have used the Scorpion, including Belgium, Brunei, Chile, Honduras, Indonesia, Ireland, Jordan, Malaysia, New Zealand, Nigeria, the Philippines, Spain, Tanzania, Thailand, Venezuela, and more. The vehicle served in numerous major military operations, including during the Turkish invasion of Cyprus in 1974, the year after it began rolling off the production line. Later that year, the British government decided to permanently withdraw its forces from the bitterly divided country. Scorpions also served during the Falklands War, a 10-week conflict between the UK and Argentina that took place in 1982, as well as the Iran-Iraq War, which lasted from 1980 to 1988, and the Gulf War, which occurred over a 6-month period between 1990 and 1991. The British military retired the vehicles just a few years later, mainly because firing the main armament caused toxicity hazards inside the crew compartment. They were also withdrawn because the military favored other CVRT vehicles, namely the Scimitar and Spartan, and no longer needed the Scorpion to carry out their duties. Some countries still use the Scorpion today, including the Botswana Defense Force, the Iranian Army, and the Nigerian Army. Malaysia used them until 2018, when officials announced that the vehicle no longer served the country's military needs and that it had become inconvenient and expensive to maintain. The British military is working to develop new vehicles to replace the Scimitar and Spartan that are still being used, and the era of the CVRT vehicle will most likely come to an end sometime over the next several years. Number 1. Iowa-class battleships. Built for the U.S. Navy during the 1940s, Iowa-class battleships were designed to intercept the fastest warships of enemy navies and to act as the fast wing in traditional battle lines alongside slower battleships. 4 vessels were completed: the USS Iowa, New Jersey, Missouri, and Wisconsin. They were conceptualized as part of the Navy's War Plan Orange, which anticipated eventual warfare with Japan in the Pacific arena. Military experts predicted that U.S. forces would be vulnerable to high-speed Japanese cruisers and that the existing American battleships would be too slow to force Japanese vessels into battle. Navy planners envisioned a fast detachment that could keep up with its aircraft carriers and a strike force that could act as scouts by operating ahead of the rest of their fleet, and which could also fight alongside their fleet when necessary. This was the first time that the Navy prioritized speed in a battleship design. The North Carolina and South Dakota class ships that preceded the Iowa class vessels were heavily armed but slow, with a maximum speed of around 32 miles per hour or 28 knots. Their designers were limited by the terms of the Washington Naval Treaty, which imposed a maximum standard tonnage of 35,000 tons for each vessel. Signed after World War I, the treaty was an agreement among various countries to restrict their naval construction for the sake of preventing an arms race. When Japan withdrew from disarmament discussions in 1936, an updated treaty increased the maximum standard tonnage of the participating parties' naval ships to 45,000 tons. U.S. naval architects had the advantage of working within these widened parameters when they designed the Iowa-class vessels, resulting in the fastest battleships ever built. Each ship measured 880 feet long and was powered by 8 boilers and 4 propellers. Rumors claimed that they were capable of reaching speeds of up to 40 miles per hour over short distances, but its officially recorded top speed was 35.7 miles per hour or 31 knots. The Iowa-class ships served in 5 wars between the 1940s and the early 1990s. During World War II, they functioned as fast escorts for Essex-class aircraft carriers. They provided naval gunfire support to the United Nations forces during the Korean War before being decommissioned and mothballed during the late 1950s. In 1968, during the Vietnam War, the USS New Jersey came out of retirement to serve in the Vietnam War. Before being sent overseas, the ship underwent a modernization overhaul. After having its radar upgraded and receiving improved electronic warfare systems along with other improvements, the crew performed a shakedown cruise to test its performance. During the cruise, Captain Floyd Gooch pushed the engines to their limits, reaching a top speed of 40 miles per hour or 35 knots. The ship held this speed for 6 hours until Captain Gooch decided to see if its engineering plant could handle maximum strain. He ordered the ship to go instantly from all ahead flank, which means to drive at the maximum speed, to all back emergency, which means the opposite. The New Jersey continued moving for 2 miles before finally coming to a full stop. A post-shakedown inspection of the ship found the engine in perfect working order even after being brutally tested. In 1969, the USS New Jersey appeared on a list of ships that the government had ordered to be inactivated. It was towed to the Puget Sound Naval Shipyard for storage, and it was unclear whether the aging Iowa-class ships would ever re-enter service. During the 1980s, the vessels were reactivated and armed with missiles as part of the 600-ship Navy initiative, which sought to rebuild the Navy's fleet following post-Vietnam cutbacks. Their last combat engagement came during the Gulf War in 1991 when the USS Wisconsin and Missouri fired missiles at Iraqi targets. Following the collapse of the Soviet Union, the U.S. scaled back on the fleet that was created under the 600-ship Navy plan. By then, the Iowa-class ships had become more or less obsolete anyway, but they had come to represent a source of national pride, so they were spared from being scrapped and donated to various museums around the country where they remain to this day. Thanks for watching. Which one of these speedy war machines is your favorite? Tell us in the comments below and hit that subscribe button while you're at it. Thanks again, and we'll see you next time for another amazing video right here on American Eye.